So now I'd like to introduce to you Jo Becker. She's with Human Rights Watch, and she's going to be talking about human rights and the jewelry industry. And part of that will also be a presentation with Jagdish, who's going to talk about silicosis and what's going on in the ground with people who are carving gemstones. So,
thanks, Andrea. Okay, we're going to check out how these microphones are working. I wasn't able to be with you yesterday, and I understand I missed a really great day, but I'm glad to be here. And as Andrea explained, I'm going to start off by sharing a little bit about Human Rights Watch's work in the jewelry industry, and with Jagdish Patel about his work with stonecutters and polishers in India. So Human Rights Watch researches and documents human rights abuses in about 90 countries worldwide. And we started our work on human rights violations in gold and diamond mining over a decade ago. And my particular expertise is children's rights, and so I entered this work through the lens of child labor in artisanal gold mining. And over the last 10 years, we've done investigations on conditions for children working in mines in Tanzania, Mali, Ghana, and the Philippines. The International Labor Organization estimates that there are 1 million children working in mining worldwide, and that it's one of the most dangerous sectors of work for children. They risk injury, disability, and death working in mining. This is a 13-year-old boy who dug for gold ore in a small-scale mine in Tanzania. And when we met him, he told us about an incident. He said, I was digging with another miner, and we entered a short pit. While I was digging, he told me to come out. And when I was just about to come out, the mine collapsed. This boy was, the dirt buried him to his chest, it knocked him unconscious. Other miners came immediately and dug him out and took him to the hospital, where he learned he had internal injuries. And he was in the hospital for a week and still has pain in his midsection. Some of the risks to children in mining include collapses of unstable shafts, skeletal injuries from carrying heavy loads, and injuries and respiratory illnesses from crushing the ore and breathing in the ore dust. In Ghana, I met a boy who said that he'd been coughing up blood for over 2 weeks as a result of breathing in the dust at the mine. When we investigated conditions in Philippines, we found that children were doing what's called compressor mining. They are diving underwater down to 10 meters, breathing in air through a tube attached to an air compressor. They stay underwater for hours at a time. If the compressor stops working, the divers get no oxygen, and the children risk drowning and decompression sickness. One of our biggest concerns is certainly mercury, which is often used in small-scale mining to separate the gold from the ore. In Tanzania, Mali, and Ghana, we met children who handled mercury with their bare hands, with no real awareness of what the toxic implications might be. I interviewed one boy who said that he had developed tremors in his hand and could no longer write properly, and he linked that to his mercury exposure. But the vast majority of children that we've interviewed had no concept of how dangerous mercury can be, that it can cause permanent brain damage. Many of the children, if they were told anything at all, they were simply told, don't put it in your mouth. When we interviewed traders who went to these mines to buy the gold, it became very quickly apparent that they paid no consideration to whether child labor was present at the mine or not. And in fact, the only thing they really cared about was the quality and the value of the gold itself. So from our investigation, especially in Ghana, it became clear that due diligence broke down almost immediately at the mine site. Human Rights Watch has also looked at environmental harm, the way that mines have polluted waterways and soil with toxic chemicals, harming whole communities and their livelihoods. And we've also documented conflict-related abuses, especially in the Democratic Republic of Congo with gold, and much more recently in Central African Republic, where the diamond trade has been fueling rebel abuses against civilians. And then we've also looked at forced labor in diamond mining in Zimbabwe. When we do our work, we always publish reports with our findings and recommendations, especially to governments, because they have the primary responsibility to take care of their citizens and to uphold human rights. But what we find is that these governments often have very limited capacity to do monitoring and to ensure that labor and human rights standards are being upheld. So about 3 years ago, we began to look much more directly at the jewelry industry itself and their sourcing of gold and diamonds. We identified 13 of the world's largest and best-known jewelers, representing different geographic markets from the US, Europe, and India. And collectively, these 13 companies represent or generate over $30 billion a year in revenue. These 13 countries represent about 10% of the entire jewelry industry in revenue. We approached them and we asked them for information. Where do you get your gold and your diamonds? How do you know that it's responsibly sourced? How do you know that it's not tainted with human rights abuses? 10 of the 13 responded to us, and we had an engagement with them that included correspondence, face-to-face meetings, sometimes at the CEO level. And we evaluated the companies and their performance on 8 different criteria that roughly track with the OECD guidance on due diligence in responsible minerals. So we asked them, do you have a supply chain policy? Can you trace your gold and your diamonds? Do you know where it comes from? What do you do to assess your human rights risks? How do you respond to those risks? What kind of third-party verification do you have? What kind of assurance do you have that your suppliers are sourcing responsibly? Do you publicly report on your sourcing and your due diligence? Know where you're getting your gold and your diamonds? And do you support artisanal mining communities? What we found is that some of the companies are taking important steps to address human rights risks in their supply chains, but that most companies, in fact all of them, still fall short of their of meeting international standards. Some are quite active in trying to trace their supply chains, identify human rights risks, and respond, but we found that too many simply rely on the assurances of their suppliers without rigorously verifying their claims. And in fact, some have made no commitments at all. We found that almost none could identify the sources of their gold and diamonds and source it back to the mine of origin. And very few really provide comprehensive reports to their customers and to the public about their human rights due diligence. We published a report in February of last year, just ahead of Valentine's Day, to show what we found. And we actually rated the companies. Okay, this is now frozen. Just want to show you my ranking chart. Any thoughts? Oh, there we go. Okay, so you can see that some did better than others. We put no companies in our excellent category because we felt all could do better. We felt that Tiffany had the most robust system of human rights due diligence in their supply chains. And as you can see, we put Bulgari, Cartier, Pandora, and Signet in a moderate category, where they were taking some steps, but other areas where they could do better. Some others were weak, and as you can see, there were a number of companies, including Rolex, that refused to engage with us at all, which did not allow us to give them any kind of ranking. When we issued our report, we also simultaneously launched a social media campaign called Behind the Bling, where we had videos online, we had actions, Twitter actions online, encouraging consumers and interested members of the public to contact the companies directly, pointing out where they were doing well and where they needed to do better. And we really wanted to use our report and our campaign to challenge these companies to up their game and to increase strengthen their policies and their practices. And in fact, we've been encouraged that some have responded and have taken some good steps. So Boodles, for example, the UK jewelry company that you can see is in the weak category. They've expanded and published their code of conduct for the first time. They've begun audits of their sourcing practices. The German jeweler Christ, for the first time, has published its supplier code of conduct and given other information out publicly about its human rights due diligence. Chopard from Switzerland has increased the amount of gold that it's sourcing from fair mines in Latin America. They've increased the transparency of their gold supply. And Signet, who many of us here in the US are familiar with, has started to source some gold from conflict-free artisanal mines in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We didn't want this project to be a one-time thing. We didn't want these big jewelry companies to think that we were going to assess them once and then move on and forget about it. So we've let all of them know that we're publishing a follow-up report in 2020 where we'll be looking at their performance over the last couple of years. We've let them know that they have the opportunity to improve their ranking, and we know that some of them are taking steps to try and do so. Overall, I think we've been seeing some improvements in the jewelry industry. We're happy to see the improved code of practices that the RJC recently unveiled. But overall, I think like all of us here, we know that there's still a lot that the industry needs to do to really protect human rights of the people who produce their gems and their precious metals. So that's Human Rights Watch's work, and now I'm really pleased to transition to a conversation with Jagdish Patel. Jagdish is from Gujarat, India. He started his career as a chemical engineer, and he worked in factories for 20 years, and then shifted into trade unions, where he really became aware of the occupational safety and health risks that workers faced. And he is now an occupational health activist, working primarily with people working in the stone cutting and polishing industry in India. So I'm going to invite Jagdish to come forward. He's going to start with a short film, and then we're going to have a dialogue about his work.
Vadodara in Gujarat is the city of Khambhat. Khambhat is an old town with a flourishing industry of agate grinding. Agate is an attractive stone that beautifies ornaments and jewelry. It has astrological significance of a long and a prosperous life. But what about the workers who give it shape and polish? At Shakkarpur, near Khambhat, one often comes across such sights. These are the agate workers polishing the agate stone. The polishing and grinding technique has more or less been the same since years. But this old technique brings the workers directly in contact with the silica dust. Years of exposure to silica dust has rendered many workers to be the victim of silicosis. At Shakkarpur, almost every house has one or more of their family members succumb to silicosis. Lack of awareness about silicosis has entire family wiped out by this slow and degenerated disease. The silica dust rising from the agate grinding spreads in air and settles on the unsuspecting persons who are in the vicinity of the workplace. A silicosis victim is not the only one to suffer from the disease. As it strikes the wage earner of the family, it is often the family that also suffers along with the victim. An impoverished family is often unable to meet the medical expense of the treatment and are often forced to either sell their land or incur a debt. With time, even the relatives withdraw their support and the family members are left to fend for themselves. In such cases, the family members are vulnerable to exploitation. In many cases, due to lack of employment opportunities, the workers are forced to take the same job that has destroyed their family members. The families don't approve of the marriage alliance if the prospective son-in-law is an agate worker, because a silicosis victim often dies at a young age. There are a handful of organizations that are working for the silicosis victims and are committed to bring about a change in the scenario. In Gujarat, People's Training and Research Center (PTRC) is one such organization that has been working at the grassroots level amongst the agate workers of Khambhat region. For the past 2 decades, PTRC is spreading awareness about this deadly disease and handling cases that have helped change the government policies.
In last 20 years, because of our consistent efforts, Government of Gujarat Health Department has started diagnosis of silicosis at local level. Government of Gujarat came up with a scheme to pay relief of rupees 1 lakh to the victim families, and this whole industry was unorganized, so it has started moving from unorganized to organized sector slowly.
Thanks to the dedicated work of the organization, today many families have received compensation and are now guiding their life out of poverty. But is compensation answer to silicosis? Why is there no mechanism in place to stop this disease? Silicosis in today's time is a shame. Despite years of fight against this disease, it is still prevalent and continues to claim its victims. From ignoring silicosis